Okay, I think we can start now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our series of decentralized identity, wherein we talk about the application of decentralized identity across different industry sectors. So we have already had five different events, and this is the sixth one now. Today, we are going to talk about EdTech. I am Shiva Garwal. I am founder and CEO of My Earth ID. I am also leading Government Blockchain Association in Europe. So GB is a global nonprofit organization which helps public sector organizations and governments to understand and adopt blockchain technology. And Earth ID is a decentralized identity management platform that helps organization to basically to securely and safely onboard their customers, and then also it helps users and individuals to own their own identity. So today we are going to talk about how decentralized identity basically can solve some of the problems which the ed tech sector faces. So with that, I would start with my presentation. Okay. And then following this presentation, we would have a panel discussion, which would be moderated by Angeline Gotzel, and then which would be our discussion, and then we will have a closing. So let me get started on this. So this is a very interesting concept that I actually found a few days ago, which is basically the evolution of society. So I think when we usually have technical discussions, and when we have basically when we talk about blockchain and so many other emerging technologies, usually we talk about Web 3.0, we talk about Industry 4.0, but this is a very new concept which is about Society 5.0, right? And when you look at the evolution, actually, so it says that obviously the human society, it started with hunting and gathering, and then obviously we moved to agriculture, then we moved to basically the industrial revolution, and then finally it was the information society, right, wherein we had internet, we had world wide web, which was about how the information can be distributed, and then how the information can be democratized, right? So it was all about how can we globally access information, and how can we have a global communications, right? And that is what internet did for us, right? It changed the way we basically communicated with each other, and then the way we basically accessed information, right? And it has a everlasting impact on human society, right? But from there onwards, when we look at the new trends, the new technologies, that is now basically pushing us towards society 5.0. And basically society 5.0 is about a convergence of cyberspace and physical space. So we can already see this impact in our lives, right? Most of our lives, we are now basically dwindling between the physical space and the digital space. So we have laptops, we have iPads, we have smartphones with which we are basically interacting with our near and dear ones. Even in our professional life, in our educational life, and even in our personal lives. So this is where society 5.0 is about the convergence of the digital world and the physical world, right? And actually that is what the future is, right? And we are moving more and more towards the virtual reality. We are talking about smart cities, we are talking about online classrooms, we are talking about working from home. So the concepts are really changing, and that is how the society is changing. And actually, if you think about this, it has a major impact on how we conduct ourselves, right? Because I think with social media, we have seen that how we behave face to face versus how we behave on internet is also drastically different, right? And then obviously it brings certain challenges, but it also opens a lot of opportunities, right? And I think that is what we need to consider about what the impact of society 5.0 on different industries or different spheres or of our lives. uh, when we talk about education sector, right? So obviously, I think education is also getting impacted with the concept of society 5.0, right? Because now we are moving in the virtual space. We are getting access to education or knowledge in different ways. We are not restricted to classrooms. So we have so many edtech platforms wherein we can get on-demand access to knowledge. A lot of us basically we would have learned about the latest concepts about Bitcoin, about blockchain, and so many other things over the net, right? Because obviously, I think, and that is where the existing infrastructure of education is kind of falling behind, as we can already see, right? More we are learning from internet rather than basically learning from school. But I think the key challenge here is about with respect to democratization of education, right? Because right now when we look at the education sector, it's very brick and mortar in that sense, and that is where I think, and also it's a very costly affair as well, and this is where accessibility is a huge challenge. And obviously the edtech space is solving this challenge to a certain extent, but obviously edtech should not only be about cost savings, it should be about equalization, standardization, and accessibility, so that people from around the world, they can basically get access to education and knowledge, and basically improve their lives, right? So that is one of the challenges that edtech sector looks at solving. The second challenge is about the knowledge economy, right? Because obviously when we look at the society, we invest a lot of money into education of our children, of the people around us, right? Because the it's like uh, the humanity would grow only when basically we have proper knowledge, proper access to knowledge. But obviously I think it that is where I think the tech industry is quite responsible for driving innovation for efficacy and efficiency. And also it's about that the knowledge economy is basically the fundamental support to our economic lives. So this is where edtech sector has a huge responsibility on their shoulders to basically drive this knowledge economy. But having said that, we do have a huge and growing edtech landscape. So obviously there are different spheres of edtech landscape with respect to knowledge creation, knowledge management, discovery, uh, communication, experience, learning. So obviously there are a lot of organizations which are doing really good work in this, but obviously there are certain challenges which are still there and which we are going to talk about in next few slides. And edtech sector is a booming sector, right? There are a few reasons to that, and COVID is obviously one of them. And we can see that that edtech sector is growing at a very strong pace, and it's almost going to double by 2025, right? So obviously it's good for it's good for the society, it's good for economy. But obviously I think the key question is whether we are solving the right challenges at the right time. Now, obviously, I think all of us are impacted by COVID, and we have seen that how our lifestyle has changed, right? We are more remote, we are more secluded, and we are finding new ways of working and going about with our lives, right? And this hasn't changed for students also. Obviously, the students are getting impacted a lot. So obviously, there's a huge impact on the education industry, right? Because right now most of the schools are closed around the world, right? And this is where 89% of the student population is not having access to education anymore, right? Because of the school closure, the university closures. And this has a severe impact on students. And this is where I think one big question that this raises is that if we have a strong edtech sector, why did this happen, right? Because obviously if we are moving from physical world to the virtual world, and then we have a booming edtech sector, so is that actually supporting our knowledge and education needs? Because obviously I think when we do have a very strong infrastructure in terms of physical schools and universities, but when we have to basically move from physical to virtual world, whether we have the right infrastructure in terms of getting accessibility to online education. So this is one of the very important questions in terms of whether we are ready for society 5.0. And obviously I think as I mentioned, right, so COVID has actually pushed us as individuals, but even basically students to basically remote classrooms, right? And this has its own benefits as well as I think underlying frustrations. So obviously I think kids are happy because they can stay at home and then they can learn from home, but then it actually adds to a lot of friction, because obviously I think there are certain things which you can do online, and there are certain things which you can do offline, right? And one of the key challenges basically with respect to is that now we are pushing pushing our kids and students to the online world, right? And obviously they are already there, they're accessing social media, but the key problem is that whether this tech world is it ready for a lot of a huge percentage of students to move to the online world, because obviously it comes at a cost, right? And some of the concerns that it raises are these, right? So obviously there's a huge challenge with respect to security. whether the students and then the kids and the children, are they secure online, right? Because we have seen issues with respect to cyber security, cyber bullying, and then obviously I think there's a lot of bad content. So it's about whether that online environment, online education environment, is safe or not, right? And even we have seen this in professional world. We have started using Zoom meetings, we have started using meetups and so many other online platforms, but we have faced issues like Zoom bombing. So basically, the key point here is that whether we have created a secure world for the children and the students in general or not, when we talk about education using technology in general. The second thing is about privacy, right? Obviously, when you are accessing online platforms for gaining access to knowledge or education, obviously privacy is a huge concern. How do you ensure that the information that you are sharing on the internet, whether that is not being misused, and then whether that is not being used for fraudulent purposes? So privacy has become a very huge concern in post-pandemic world, and it was in general a concern, because obviously when you look at social media platforms and then in general we spending a lot of our life online, I think privacy is a concern. But obviously now we are talking about children and students living a more frequent online life, and then that basically creates a huge challenge with respect to privacy, and we want our children and kids to be basically safe and secure. And lastly, it's about compliance as well, right? So obviously right now, when you are in a physical world, when you're sitting in a classroom in a school or a university, there are certain guidelines and procedures that are followed with respect to safety and security. But when you are online, whether all those compliance or procedures are being followed or not, right? So I think that is another big question and another big concern which is being raised. And all these issues, right, with respect to security, privacy, and compliance, they actually boil down to trust, right? Do we trust these tech platforms? Do we trust these online platforms where now our children and kids or students would basically get access to knowledge and education, right? So these are some of the concerns that the tech industry is facing. So obviously, I think when we when we look at potential solutions, decentralized identity is one of the potential solutions, right? Because decentralized identity is about establishing trust. It's about putting the control of your identity, of your information, in an individual's hand, right? So it's about a user-centric identity which can be used to basically secure access, ensure privacy, and provide consent. And obviously, it's also about data ownership, right? So it's about how can you use how can you protect online your identity online, and how can you get secure and safe and secure access to various platforms online, which basically which in this particular context, it's about knowledge and education, right? And this is where decentralized identity is about creating an ecosystem where every individual owns their identity, and then they are able to basically access different aspects of this education as a whole, right? And then obviously there are different stakeholders. So when we look at education industry, we have students, we have teachers, we have employers, and there are so many other organizations, right? So this is where it's about how do we bring them together in a trust building mechanism, so that the interactions can happen without worrying about the some of the concerns that we discussed on the previous slide. And when we talk about decentralized identity, right, I just want to talk about some of the characteristics of decentralized identity, because obviously even before decentralized identity or self-sovereign identity, we were doing identity management, right? We had centralized identity, we had federated identities, we have our online credentials, we use user ID passwords, we have employee IDs, we have student IDs. So in that sense, we already had certain identities which were managed by certain organizations. So even when you look at some of the edtech platforms, they are using Facebook ID, they are using Google ID. So you can actually log into all those platforms using some of those existing identities that we already have, right? But the key question is whether they are fit for purpose or not, right? And this is where some of the key characteristics of decentralized or self-sovereign identity are minimalistic, right? In the sense, like, you are able to basically use them in a way where you are sharing the minimal amount of information that is needed for a specific use case. It's resilient in the sense like you own it and you control it, and nobody can take it away from, right? For example, Facebook can ban me. They can take away my Facebook ID. Then what would happen to the to all the platforms which I was using my Facebook ID, right? So in that sense, a self-sovereign identity is resilient because it's owned by the user. It's also persistent in the sense like again, it's about the ownership, right? Nobody can take it away from you. Portability in the sense that I should be able to basically take it with me. I should be able to, it should be technology independent, and and platform independent, right? So that is one of the key characteristics of uh, self-sovereign identity. Also, it's about consent, right? Because it's my identity, it's my information. I should be able to control it, right? I should be able to say when should it can be used, and how it can be used, and why it can be used, right? So it I should be able to define the purpose for which I have shared my information, and it's shared only for that particular purpose. So it's very very consent oriented, and all these characteristics are actually aligned with the GDPR, basically, which is like the global data protection guidelines, the general data protection guidelines. And this is where basically it ensures that we have privacy, we have consent. And it's also about security, right? So it is like I'm able to maintain my privacy and confidentiality, and I'm sharing only what is required when it's required. So these are some of the key characteristics of SSI. And when we talk about Earth ID, Earth ID is a decentralized identity management platform that basically ensures or empowers users with privacy, consent, and data ownership. And when we look at how this platform works, is that there are actually three stakeholders of an identity. There are issuers. There's the subject who's the owner of the identity, and then there are verifiers, right? So when I talk about issuers, so issuers are the organizations which issues identities, right? So it could be government organizations which are issuing the national IDs, the passports, the driving licenses, or it could be the universities which are issuing the student IDs, or the the degree credentials, or it could be membership organizations, right? So all those organizations which issue a certain credential or a identity to us, they are basically the issuers. And then obviously I as an individual is basically the subject of those identities. And lastly, we have verifiers, who are service providers, who are requesting for this information for enabling certain services to us. And SSI, what SSI does is basically that it brings all three stakeholders together, connected through a distributed ledger technology. So what that means is that it reduces the friction with respect to how this information is exchanged from issuer to the subject, and then from that subject to the verifier, right? So there's a concept of verifiable credentials, in the sense like all your vital records, your qualifications, your ownership, they can be digitized, and then they can be directly issued by the issuer to your identity wallet, which is a private space. It could be on your smart device, it could be in the cloud, or it could be on a hardware wallet. It could be a smart card or something. So basically, you are carrying instead of carrying physical documents with you, like your passport or driving license, student IDs, you can basically have all these informations in a digital mechanism on your wallet, and then you would be able to share this information in a selective data sharing model with respect to what information do you want to share with a respective individual or a respective service provider. So what it does is like it builds trust between the three stakeholders of identity, and then it also reduces the friction, which is an underlying issue with respect to identity management. And when we apply this to the education use case, this is where there are three broad categories, right? One is basically the life cycle of the student, right? So obviously, which contains the onboarding. So when we join a university, right? So there's a certain checks and balances, or KYC processes happen before we are able to join a university. Then obviously we get access to certain courses, and then we also basically go about accessing physical spaces, digital spaces, and that is where SSI basically plays a strong role with respect to how does a student basically maintain his life cycle the during that university or a school mechanism. The second thing is basically the credentials. The credentials are basically, it could be your IDs, it could be the degree certificates, it could be transcripts. So all the credentials that are being issued during the life cycle of a student can also be basically managed using a self-sovereign identity. Earth ID platform provides that. And lastly, it's about enablement, because obviously once you have completed your education, or basically completed a particular course, it's about using those degree, those credentials in a real world with respect to getting a job, buying property, or basically getting married. Because obviously education and credentials plays a strong role in your life after university, right? And that is where it's quite important, that how do you manage your credentials after you have completed your education. Because right now I can imagine that I have my secondary education certificates, I have my university certificates, and whenever I'm going to find a job, I have to basically share all those credentials, right? Even when I have to buy property, or even when I have to basically apply for a visa, or a passport, I have to basically share all those credentials, right? So it's about how do I manage all those credentials during my education as well as beyond my education. So that was a quick introduction about basically how SSI can solve certain problems with respect to education industry, and the different challenges that education tech sector faces in general. So with that, I would conclude my presentation. Thank you, everyone. I think, Jillian, I would
Oh,
like to hand over it to you now.
yes, well, thank you so much indeed, Shiv. That was a fascinating run through. As I say at the very start, before we kicked off, I was saying to you, what is Society 5.0? And because we've heard of the rest of them, the agricultural revolution, the industrial, the information. So I'm really glad to understand where I'm living right now, kind of a bit of an eye opener. It's where the cyberspace and physical space converge. So really, really interesting, especially with regard to ed tech. And it's going to be a really fascinating conversation going forward this afternoon. And thank you so much for inviting me to take part. And I want to look at a couple of things from your talk with the panel. One is, we know that blockchain and technology democratizes lots of things, access, education, the whole thing. But with COVID, has shown us there's people can be left behind, and how do we bridge that gap? So fascinating talk. Thank you so much indeed. Oh, and by the way, I was going to say that NEET thing, that is so scary. Not in education, not in employment, not in training. 265 million people. Oh my goodness. Scary,
Right.
scary stuff. That's 89% of students are out of school. So, and we need to work on that. So anyway, today I'm delighted to say we have a really interesting panel here today. And what I'm going to do is ask each of them to say just one or two words very quickly about who they are, to hear from their own, rather than me sort of monitor and reading out their bios. So if I can start off with Maria Escuela, am I saying that right? Who's a founding member of Enable, a really hot topic here. Maria, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself with a few words.
Sure, thank you. My name is Maria Esquela. The Q sounds like a K. And I am the president of the Enable Alliance. It's the nonprofit that supports a global community that galvanized around enablingAfuture.org. We're known for creating and sharing open source designs, particularly for people who have limb differences, especially upper limb differences. But we've always held that our method for collaboratively innovating with the need knowers, sharing these open source around the world, the call to make sure that we were using affordable materials so that they could take these designs and enhance them and make them local. And then a community that vowed to not only participate in this at all levels of professional certification and credentialing, but to the very youngest. But that we see ourselves as a community that has stepped up to make them and give them to people who can't make them for themselves. So every device that we've made, it has been given away for free, and then people get access to education and training to leapfrog over being underserved where they are and to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Maria. So fascinating, because one of the points that I made about students not being left behind, and obviously able versus enable is a huge issue. And being online does not always make it better for people who are not able-bodied. So Vincent Langard, you are the co-founder of Blockchain BC Diploma Online Certification. Vincent, a few words about yourself, please.
Oh, thanks for the invite. I'm very glad to be here to share with you about this hot topic that is the ideas. So I'm a CTO and co-founder of BC Diploma and co-inventor of Evidence, a blockchain protocol patented in the US in 2020, which is designed to secure data over a very long term with a high level of security thanks to the blockchain technology, respecting data privacy and promoting decentralization. In a few words, we have built a blockchain-based digital credential application, which is deployed now in more than 100 universities over 16 countries in the world, with notably the support of Microsoft, which is our key partner right now. And we are also member of the IMS Global Learning Consortium, and our blockchain open badge feature is certified by this institution, by the way.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. And that's also crucial. We're able to certify our qualifications. The other two other members of the panel, we have Dr. Jörg Moth, if I'm saying that correctly. Is that Jörg or George?
Yes. Europe, yeah. Europe. It's quite.
Yeah. Founder of Satoshi Coin. Perhaps you'd like to say a few words about yourself, please.
Yeah, Satoshi Consulting and Education is the company which was founded at the very beginning of the Bitcoin existence, the education field in this new technologies and DLT technology, and also about cryptocurrencies and all the stuff in there, was necessary in 2010 when I founded the Satoshi School, what now is Satoshi Consulting and Education, when we finally figuring out that this adoption of technology needs more knowledge. And since we are in the edtech world, very present by teaching governments and privacies and companies and all over the world. We are worldwide acting in that. We have a lot of experience in online trainings and physical trainings, and we can compare the whole stuff where is the necessary to our topic, for example. So that's all the reason why I'm working with the Government Blockchain Association in education and other fields like cybersecurity very close.
Perfect. Thank you indeed for that. And the fourth member of the panel is Gan Lakshima, who is a tech geek and keynote. Gan, are you here today? Ah, here you are. Is it Gan or Ghana? Am I saying your name right? I can't hear you. Is it just me?
No, I think she is not audible. Gan, you are not audible.
Is this better?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. It seems like there's some issue with my earphones. Yeah, Gyan is good. Thank you, Jillian. So hi, everyone. Really excited to be here today. My name is Gyan, and I work as a product manager for emerging technologies with Wiley Next. Wiley Next is essentially an edtech organization under the Wiley umbrella. If you've heard of it, it's a famous publishing house. And at Wiley Next, what we are trying to do is basically build the gap between students as well as the emerging technologies that are coming up, and creating a talent pool that is familiar with how to work with all these emerging technologies and can incorporate these learnings into corporates. So that's what I'm doing currently, being the link between the students as well as the corporates, and of course the general startup world where there's a talent pool requirement for people who are working in this technology space. My primary background, as the bio says, is technology. I've been a software developer for over 6-7 years and have been in the blockchain space as a developer, as a technology enthusiast for over 4 years now. I've worked on a couple of different projects in the space of blockchain, and I'm generally enthusiastic about education. I do a lot of trainings, etc. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here and excited to see what's happening in the space of decentralized identity versus how it can empower the education sector as such.
Thank you indeed, Gan. So I think Shiv has set a very high bar for us in his introduction. And I very much like, I'm going to start off with, I think with Vincent, I'm going to pick on you first. I'm going to start off with the whole idea of EdTech democratizes access to education for people. And that's fantastic because not everybody physically is beside a university or a hall of learning. Maybe they haven't got the money for it. There's huge costs. So Vincent, if I could start with you, how do we balance the access to education with the minding of the people in the process?
Well, it's a very good question. In fact, it's pretty difficult to bring that kind of technologies to the mass. This DID's issue is the same as the blockchain. So we know that it's the answer of main topics like privacy, self-sovereign identity, securization. But the way to bring this kind of technology to the mass of people is pretty difficult. And that's why we are trying to build solutions that are understandable by a lot of people, like students, institutions, by bringing this technology in a very simple way. I hope I've answered to your question.
Thank you, because it's technology is wonderful, except if you don't have it. I do remember hearing a mother on radio during the first lockdown, I think it was. She had 3 children in primary school, so that's the younger under age of 12, trying to do schoolwork at home. She came from a disadvantaged area, and she had 1 smartphone. That was the only smartphone in that family, and they didn't even have Wi-Fi. So it's a great technology until you don't have it. And I suppose the same question that maybe asked, which was slightly different to Maria, because that's if people who are disadvantaged perhaps with technology. How does it work with Enable? Are there different requirements needed?
Well, we try to make sure that we're giving access to as many people as possible around the world. That's why we return to the Open Societies movement, using open source for the designs, Creative Commons for the curriculum, open hardware movement, and open know-how for, especially for the open source medical supply designs. It does allow you to leverage some of the free apps for scanning, for instance, even for measuring, to use the free apps for digital design. And then even for slicing, we try to combine different groups in our networks so that, for instance, medical advisors can review the measurements, the video, the pictures in order to customize our designs, then send them to someone who might be able to do the 3D printing, give that to someone who might not have a 3D printer but is very good at assembling, and get that to the medical volunteer to do the fitting. That would be for, also an opportunity for someone to go from having a generic design to a customized design. So the next hand that's 3D printed should be better than the first, and the inclusion is gradually moving someone from becoming a self-advocate, which is already quite an achievement, to learning about the technology, leapfrogging over what the disadvantages are in their area, and being connected with a network of people that will help them, even if it's informally, to get training. So the opportunity is for people to begin to think as entrepreneurs and as advocates for others, and to triangulate their solutions, which raises up all the boats. So in the end, the person that is transformed it might typically be thought of as the person who receives an adaptation or assistive device, but truly it's everybody in that entire group, because all of the skills are going to be improved, and the identity that we see as part of their digital identity, it could be overshared if you're the recipient. It could be that you're a woman or a young girl who is learning STEM in a place where that is not a typical opportunity, or it actually places you at risk. And then also that in recognizing the development of your skills and your opportunities, we like to use open recognitions as well. And we want to make sure that as those opportunities are stepped up to, that we're giving the resources for the next step. So if you make a hand and give one away, giving you filament. The opportunities here also to say that there are employers or schools in your area that are looking for skills that you are developing and interests that you have, and matching them to scholarships, to opportunities in education or opportunities in employment. So for instance, the largest hospital in Dar es Salaam, the closest 3D printing facility is run by women, which is very unusual there. Parents who had been interested in creating hands for themselves can go there and get training. And then they're able to make things like not only the splints, other things that the hospital might need that are missing because of disrupted supply chain, but they can also leverage the work that's been done in the open fluxure microscope, a very easy to print lab quality microscope. There are stethoscopes and other things that people can take out of the community and not bring back, which would ensure the health of the community or the hospital, or to recycle them, to shred them in place. We use a lot of recycled plastic materials. So another opportunity in our ecosystem is the development of these fair trade dignified work opportunities. So in Dar es Salaam, women were gathering plastic out of the environment, that separating what could be cleaned up and recycled and used to print what was needed. And we have examples of that with around the world with the Million Waves Project that was gathering nylon and plastic, making hands. In fact, there's a video on the NOAA website of a girl who receives a hand, is using it to help shred plastic, and gathering the plastic off the beach as part of an international coastal cleanup. So I did not anticipate when I started working on robotic, human-powered arms and hands for people that it was going to grow beyond myoelectric and electric devices to training people in electronics and sewing soft circuits. But that's exactly what we've been doing. And it makes me appreciate now that when we talk about your digital ID, that some youth here in the States whose identities have been overshared want to change their name before they go to college because they don't want to be known or immediately recognized as a person who had a limb difference. They want to be known for who they are and cultivate an identity. And then others who are at risk should have the opportunity to decide what they're going to share about resources they get, maybe after they come home and they're not vulnerable, or maybe as women and girls when they are in a place that's safe. The Afghanistan team that competed in a global robotics competition here in DC, when they returned home, one of the fathers was assassinated and they needed to be relocated to Canada. Other girls in programs are in hiding. And so I see this as not just something for people in higher education, but that the more underserved and the more vulnerable you are, the younger you need to think about these options. Thank you.
Yeah, wow, you've taken us onto a whole new plane there now, Maria, which I'm going to bring the conversation back a bit because I'd love perhaps another time to talk about that. That is fascinating and very real and very scary, looking at people wanting to change their identity. And that's not unreasonable. Before I had no hand, now I have a hand. Judge me with the hand. And then also, as you say, some of the more scary geopolitical aspects of the work that you're doing. But maybe I go to Maria. I would still want to go back to this whole idea about access to education and tech. So is that being fulfilled in your opinion? Not Maria, sorry, I beg your pardon, again, sorry. Is that being fulfilled in your opinion?
So we actually work with a lot of students, right? And I am based out of India, and we are constantly trying to recruit the best talent, or trying to figure out like how can we, get the best folks on board. And oftentimes we see that this is one of the problems, right? There's a lack of uniform accessibility when it comes to education and technology resources, right? So I think I feel like being able to have like a DID system in place, or being able to have like a way where we can ensure that there is uniform access to education. I don't think we are still there yet. There's a lot of work that is to be done in that space. Especially, I think some of the points that Maria raised, which were very valid, right? Like in terms of education is one of the basic. One of the most basic rights for human beings. And if you see scenarios not just in remote parts of India, where one of the incidents that you mentioned, that there's only just one smartphone in one family, right? Then how do all the kids take the classes, or how do they manage, and how do they kind of record? That is also one of the things, right? Not just about accessibility, but even if you do have access to some kind of framework, technology, etc., how do you record what is associated with you from an educational perspective, right? What is the path that you have completed? What is it that you have learned? How do you create that sort of record? How do you create that sort of if I would say sort of provenance, what has been your journey in the education space. I think that is something that is missing. I'm sure that Maria has given a lot of points about access to the education, some glaringly red flags that we can see, and on the same point, we were also having I was recently having a conversation with a friend of mine about education in refugee camps, right? If you see, like, when you see the statistics, the average stay for somebody in a refugee camp is over 3 months. This is just like some kind of statistics that I found, but I'm sure it is more depending on where the refugee camps are located. But imagine in those situations, right? The longer you are away from actual infrastructure or metropolitan cities or wherever, you don't have access to anything, like forget education, and you don't know how you are supposed to understand what is happening, and how do we reach those folks. And we were figuring out what can we do from a blockchain perspective to bring education to folks in the refugee camps, etc. So these are, of course, some of the examples where there is a gap between educate access to education versus the population that is out there. But another gap that I see in terms of access itself, or in terms of connecting the dots, is even if you do have access, how do you connect the dots? What is it? How can you ensure that whatever you have learned, or and it could be from your maybe before coming to the refugee camps, or before being in some situation where your education has been discontinued, maybe you have done something in your past, right? Maybe you have accumulated some kind of knowledge, maybe you have already created some kind of profile for yourself. How do you ensure to carry that forward, where whenever you are able to get access to the next set of resources? This is something that at this point is, there's just like a big gap, right? What happens if your education suddenly discontinues? Do you get to start from the scratch? How do you verify what somebody knows? How do you verify what they have done in the past? How do you verify what they know, right? And this could be at a global level. You could just be moving from one place to another, maybe from one country to another, because of whatever reasons you're migrating, etc., right? And you already have some kind of educational background, and you want to apply for a higher education degree, or get a master's or get a specialization or something. How do you, as a migrant, or how do you, as somebody who doesn't have any, I mean, at this point there is no significant way to actually track what kind of record do you have, then how can you be given those opportunities in the education space? I think that is something that is like a big gap, according to me, in the space.
Cool. So I'm going to actually pose that question directly to Jorg. But after this, if anybody wants to jump in, don't feel you have to wait for me to ask you the question. If you have something to say, please raise your hand and come in. But Jorg, if I can go to you, that's a very good question that Gan has posed. How do people, or have you any ideas or suggests that people can tie up whatever education they might have had? Perhaps there's been a gap because they're a refugee, because of travel, because of any number of things in this COVID world, to where they are now. Do you have any suggestions of how that might be rectified or addressed?
Okay. So, and this space, when we come to the concerns, is offered, for example, the technology lack, I would say, what it is that the areas are not covered by internet, or what happens in that space. At the moment, if you see this in development countries, and I'm working in development countries also, we are going more in that focus that we say, okay, we do not have to use everyone one computer, but we can make an access in the classroom, for example, that we have an access to a computer, and we set up, for example, a system of virtual reality. So the people can meet in a virtual reality room inside the classroom where the internet is working. So this is not necessary. When the COVID-19 discussion started, for example, homeschooling was starting. And so we see all the problems all over the world. It's the same. We're talking about technology which is far away from that what we can realize at the moment. So if we talk about virtual classrooms, we talk about mirroring classrooms, we talk about AI concentration for the K-12 education and all the security concerns in there. This is more a problem of the stability of the technology and the connectivity of the problems than a problem of the idea. as long as we stay half offline and half online, we have to find a bridge between those ways to teach. This is the first necessary. So for example, I can do streaming classes. I can go for streaming on a big screen for thousands of people. So we have a project in Sri Lanka with a guy who is himself already teaching people and classes all over the country. Because of COVID, no school is open. So what we learn from that fact is, for example, also that we have to bridge the way how we learn. At the moment, we are very fixed. One of the general problems in learning, for example, I guess no one of you have ever seen an ebook with content of AI. So what we see in the next generation is that we see a lot of standalone solutions which are providing, for example, gamifying learning. Yeah, and our target should be that decentralized identification and blockchain technology, in this case DLT, should track and force all the activities on different platforms to connect the tracing of the learning effect. So more decentralized idea is necessary, not in the basic teaching, like we sitting here on a Zoom call, which is very unsecure. So everyone can listen if he wants to, yeah. So, but more concerns I have in this field, for example, think about confidential areas. Think about training on spies for government, trainings on people with content security management, for example, and we investigators, for example, diplomats, confidential areas like military education and something like that. These are high educational levels where we need security, decentralized ideas to uncover the full potential of education to areas where education is the necessary thing, where they are high covered with technology. In our outstanding areas, as we mentioned, we have to do workarounds. So we have to build groups in front of a screen. We have to make more discussions. And one big point and challenge for all educational services in the world at the moment, even if we talk about decentralized ID and you can hide your personality, is how will we overcome the bridge that people on Zoom calls, for example, like now, listen and you take a little bit away from that, but there is no interactivity, because interactivity means we have to discuss in a lightweight. Normally, when I go for Zoom calls, it's like that. I'm talking and then I ask someone, what's your opinion? What's your opinion? What's opinion? If I'm sitting in a classroom, the people start to discuss. This is a different, for example, and we are overridden by solutions which are not practical. If you ever have seen in an augmented reality room, if you have, for example, used, my colleague is saying they work with Microsoft, for example, if he ever has used HoloLens, for example, to bridge the gap of people sitting in different fields of the world and coming together in a virtual room, even in development countries where the people are sitting in a place together where they have a strong internet vibration. That's something real in there. And when it comes to the security point, it's more about the confidential fields where we need decentralized ID than a common student, which is going to school and is using a student information system. So we have to clarify where is the high level priority of keeping our ID in a secret and make it unchangeable. For example, that someone will hacking our educational level and keep out all the secrets we educate for trainings. And on the other hand, what is if the public access is there, that everyone can have an idea, for example, a My Earth ID, and can access the same content all over the world at the same time from the K-12, for example.
So do you think then that our educational mechanisms are failing us, and which have been exaggerated or brought to the fore with COVID? Because we're all, I mean, Shiv talked at the start about the convergence of the digital world and the physical world. We have been, kick-started and dragged kicking and screaming with COVID and lockdown into this half and half world. And are the solutions out there not effective enough? Who would like to?
Right.
Maybe, they're not okay. So, York is not enough. Who would anyone else like to ruin about it? Are the solutions? Do we need better solutions?
I want to take a stab at this. So, and I wanted to, taking off some points from what Dr. Oerg already mentioned, right? And this is something that he mentioned in the beginning, And so when I spoke about this gap, right, this is something that I have been thinking about for quite some time. And in 2017, 2018, we tried to build a solution wherein we created a decentralized learning platform where people who come to the platform, basically they can come to the platform and associate their different certificates or whatever learning incentives or whatever learning learnings they have done in various platforms. Our platform could kind of club it all together. That was the idea, and we built like a small POC, and you could see your learning path, your entire learning path, your entire repository history, everything over there, right? Everything in one place. And every time you complete something, you do something, either you take a course elsewhere and you attach the certificate here, or you take a course on this platform itself, you get some incentives to learn, right? And we thought that, wow, this is such a great platform, it's just going to pick up, like it's going to be awesome. But we failed badly. Okay, people hardly ever use this solution. And then we realized that,
Why?
yeah, I'll tell you the learnings also. The what we realized, and I don't know, I think this is a little, this might be common in other countries as well, is that when we think about technology, though we talk a lot about technology, the edtech sector unfortunately is lagging quite behind, at least from a from where I am, or from some of the demographics that I have seen. I can definitely say this for sure. For example, even now, if you think about creating a certificate, or showing your mark sheet at the end of the university to get a job, or or basically, whatever you can think of as a proof that you have learned something, right? Proof of learning, if that exists, right? That proof of learning is heavily paper document driven even now, right? And when you think about blockchain, the first ever thing that you think is asset digitization, right? There is no point of tracking an asset that is not digitized. You can't track physical assets on blockchain right away. You need to have a mechanism to digitize those assets. That is the first ever step to do anything on blockchain. Unless and until you have digitized assets, there is no point of talking about anything. Like, you may have stuff, you may have a lot of papers that may say that, okay, you are you are a superior academician, or you have a PhD certificate or whatever. But being able to bring technology into this requires you to have this in a digital format, and that first step itself is missing in a lot of places. And COVID has made us realize how heavily reliant we are on paper based or physical assets when it comes to the education sector, right? So when we talk about ed tech, we are actually not there yet. We need to technologize the education industry first, and ensure that we are adopting the practices first before teaching, right? We can teach about technology, we can show them how things work, we can show them how data can be stored on blockchain, how assets can be tracked. But if we don't have the assets to track, what would we track? Like, unless until we have digital assets, we can't map it to a decentralized identity. You can't map a decentralized identity to a paper. It can be torn any day. There's no point. So I think we need to reach from paper to digital assets first. And once we have that digital assets mechanism secured, then everything will flow smooth, right? Then you'll be able to find solutions to bridge the gaps that we are talking about. And I think that is one of the big, gaps why solutions are not working. There are amazing innovative solutions, like you could go into a virtual world, like a professor mentioned earlier, right? Conferences are now doing this virtual world because we are not able to meet in person. You could go to a digital world, virtual world, you could sit on a sofa, you could watch a video recording, you could chat to somebody who's sitting next to you, right? But then how do we make this as an educational experience? How do we ensure that whatever you have learned in that room, in that virtual world, whatever takeaways you had as a conversation with this person, whatever proof of learning you had during that conference, how do you link that to who you are and what your learning pathway is? That is the solution that we need to build right from the scratch. And I think that requires a lot more work than just thinking about emerging technologies. It requires actual work from governments, from individual organizations, from private sectors to put in that effort to give that push that, hey, it's time to digitize these different components of education so we can actually apply these emerging technologies to it and find innovative solutions, create uniform access for people across the globe, and link decentralized identities to give them like a great educational experience, pathways, or access.
A good point. Actually, what was funny, somebody in the chat said, good pint. I'm being Irish, I'm going, good pint. They were admiring your point that you were making, going from paper to digital. And so you want to come in there, and then I want to go to Vincent too,
Yes,
because it's all about online authentication.
yeah, as an on, I would say this problem she was describing is a little bit overhyped, because we must think in a different way. So when you talk about the digitalization and tokenization of everything, this is in this case of study elements very unnecessary. So think about how beverage and food systems working and categorizes. So when I think about, I have a beverage and food system is saying I'm drinking a Coke, it's category 1, and it's the number 1, it's describing a Coke for cold beverage. So if I have hot beverage, I have an organization tool which is prescribing. I have category 2, it's hot beverage, and 2.1 is the coffee you drink every day. So if I'm going, for example, that you do an examination, for example, in physics or something like that, I will describe the physical examination not in a digital way that I have some books to digitalize and give you some information for that. It's only about a blockchain system and a decentralized ID who is recognizing you as the person who has the right to access to virtual content and do the study on my university. And the next thing is, if I give you a certificate, I do not have to recognize all the certifications and make digital copies of the certifications. At the moment, we think that way. But if you fulfill, categorize, and we have this, for example, with examples on Ethereum, and we have this on Corda or something like that, the blockchain is giving a transaction with a transaction number. On this transaction number connected for that is the exact point, the exact what I said category, and the exact point where you're in. For example, we have a medical healthcare. We have all over the world, meanwhile, standardizations processes in the basics. So this is something we can simplify, copy, and categorize. So that is more important that if I'm going and saying I'm Professor Dr. Mold, you can prove I'm Professor Dr. Mold by what have I done and what was my student experience. And the blockchain is giving you the proof of the following up, which courses I have done. And this is a numerous system. So I do not have to digitalize the whole courses or something like that. It is more about, and then you are right, is how can we attract the people to make online courses like that here more attractive to the people, more interactive, more funny. So this is when I said this is on the way. So when I use, for example, my Earth ID, or I use the solutions of competitions, for example, that's all what I can do with the certificate. That's you're right. Then we are just tracking the output and everything in there. But it comes more for that the community of students is working on the categorizing during a study. So if we work on that and start all over the world, we will finish the system in 3 years. This is the same when you go thinking about geo mapping for GPS systems in your car. That is the same process, because we can categorize everything and we can give it a number and we can track it. That's simply what a blockchain is doing. You never will store something on a blockchain. So, and this is then only a proof that you have done your necessaries to get the right and to call yourself a doctor or something, but what you have reached, so that you can say proudly, no one can take over my ID, that's what I have reached, and no one can take my credentials away from what I have reached only by writing in the internet something wrong about me, for example. Okay, so this is for me more necessary at the moment to get more qualified students into the system which have an ID, and this is what we are working on solutions. That is not that we're talking about something coming in the future; it's already there.
Interesting. So Vincent, I'm going to go to you next, and then Maria, I know, wants to come in after. But Vincent, we're talking actually, and Jorg himself says, I can prove I've got a doctorate. You're in the business, Vincent, I understand, of producing online certification. How do you match up and make sure there's no errors or counterfeiting?
First, just a few words about what, again, I said a few minutes ago. It's very interesting as a point of the gap that we are talking about for a few minutes. I have an example of an implementation of our solution in IT, where people do not have a smartphone for the most of them, and where they, in some institution, in fact, ESCH, it's a higher education institution, who want to provide proofs that students have some competencies, and the students there do not have, for the most part of them, a smartphone. So what they try to achieve with us is to bring some paper to people who have some competencies. And on this paper, we put a QR code. And this QR code points to a digital credential which has been digitized on the blockchain. So it was a way to fill the gap between the paper and between the blockchain technology in a very easy way. It's not the solution. It's not the solution to all problem to fill this gap. But I think it's the institution that will bring solutions to the students and to the people to fill this gap.
Okay.
And to talk more about digital credential, the blockchain is clearly the solution right now to bring all the proof of authenticity of a document or data by design, because blockchain is immutable. So you will be able, an institution will be able to store information on the blockchain and to ensure that this information have been stored by the institution, and DIDs will ensure that the recipient of this digital credential will be the right one.
Thank you. Maria, you wanted to get in there on that point.
Yes, I think that digital credentials are extremely important. I think digital credentials are extremely important, not just as a way of digitizing the paper, but as a way of giving a community a source of truth, that they can talk to each other, that they can validate each other. So we're leveraging both the blockchain and open recognition. So open recognition has been used for some time. It's part of the Open Societies movement, where you can create a set of requirements. People can find out about you and about the person that is reviewing evidence that's submitted, saying I've met these requirements, and then the badge is awarded. It's free to create, it's free to give, free to receive, free to share. But the evidence stored on blockchain as an immutable timeline is incredibly powerful as a way of also discovering it. The other thing that's powerful about this process is that it yokes the requirements that you've met. It's possible to search and find other places that want those skills, so that you're able to quickly leverage this technology to enhance your educational path or your sustainability. The other thing about open recognitions is that it allows people to award these recognitions from the bottom up. And so we can also hold the institutions accountable, or we can also highlight the skills of an educator and increase the network of recognition that needs to take place in education, that educational institutions and students depend on, because it gives their training and their experience value. So one of the ways that we wanted to recognize people within refugee camps when you don't know a way of validating their identity specifically, but you can give them a digital identity. And you can begin to say, this person acts like an engineer with 25 years experience. I can't prove who this person is, but I can tell you how they behave. I can give you evidence of their work. I can give you evidence of the way that they have been able to solve problems. And that is a way of boosting what we know about this person, how we can interact with them, how we can reimburse them and give them dignified work, and highlight them in a way that will allow them to be problem solvers from within, so that there's not a sense of digital colonialization, and like I'm trying to make you fit this identity, but I'm allowing you to cultivate your identity, and I can recognize that and validate it. The other thing is that by yoking blockchain to the credentials, when they're awarded by any group, you can also issue some sort of support through smart contract. You can identify their discoveries or their sharing ideas in an open way, like an open hardware or open source movement. And that immutable timeline allows them to defend their intellectual property. And so this is another kind of structure that I think allows people to move forward, especially if the educators are very active in adopting a sense of service learning or project-based learning. Is what they're learning in the classroom immediately relevant to the needs of the community, the needs of the employers? Are the students getting real-world experience? Are they able to use what they're learning to not only to develop workforce skills, but to develop those soft skills in leadership and communication and outreach, to create what a smart city should be like, what a smart society should be like? And to know that this sense of recognition is something that it develops globally, not just in the ecosystem that's issuing or where the person exists, but is part of our validating across.
Wow, that's interesting. So I was going to ask after that question about pastoral care, and you brought it on to a different level. You're looking at it from a displaced person with no original identity, trying to build and create a new profile for themselves using blockchain in a positive way. But maybe that's a question to ask too as well. I mean, like with the identity that, and perhaps you've had it always, perhaps you're trying to gather it, perhaps you're creating it from scratch. And obviously blockchain is immutable. So how do we implement pastoral care in that process so that the right information is gathered? Who have an opinion on that?
I think sense to justice and the sense of expungement. Absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's 100% right. Do you want to, and then we can go to somebody else. But yes, how that's very important, because it's not, you want to make sure that the person has control. And that's one of the, actually it's funny, one of the slides that Shiv did before, control is kind of in the middle, but control should be really at the top, shouldn't it? Because as an individual, you want to control who you are and what your profile says about you, and also be responsible about what you're saying about yourself.
Jillian, do you want me to step in? I just want to add a few points on that particular question.
Sorry, do you know, actually, and Shiv, I must apologize. I only have the 4 panelists showing up, so I haven't seen you the last half an hour. You probably were waving at me and I was ignoring you because I couldn't see you. Sorry, the way it's set up. Yes, Shiv, in you come. In like flame.
Don't worry. No, I think it's a very important question, right? Because obviously it's about privacy, it's about consent, but it's also about accuracy, right? It's also about frauds. Because obviously when we talk, I think let me take a step back here, right? Because obviously I think the biggest challenge right now is that most of a big part of those people, they don't have a digital identity, right? So more than 3 billion people don't have a digital identity. So that has its own level of challenges, right? But as soon as we provide them digital identity, the problems with respect to frauds, with respect to accuracy, with respect to verification, with respect to privacy, with respect to consent, all those problems come in, right? And this is where the technology that we're discussing here with respect to blockchain, with respect to self-sovereign identity, the purpose of that technology is exactly this. How do we provide a safe and secure digital identity to drive social inclusion? Because when you can provide it, when you can basically bring this section of society into the society 5.0, that is when you can basically talk about democratization, you can talk about inclusion and so many other things. So obviously the first step is providing a safe and secure digital identity. And that is where the role of an issuer becomes very, very important. Usually when we talk about an SSI, there's actually a sequence in which these identities are issued. So obviously, when the user actually creates their SSI, they have to somehow first create an identity which is accepted by a large portion of the industry or the society. Usually it's a national identity. For example, in India, we have that Aadhaar program, right, which is basically accepted, which is like providing a digital identity to more than 1 billion people. Right, but obviously, I think they implemented this with respect to providing a digital identity. But whether it is the right implementation is always debatable. But it's about first providing a digital identity through which then you can actually do the next levels, right? Because in education sector, we are talking about credentials, right, and access to education. But before you can do all those things, you need to basically have some form of digital identity first. And this is where you can categorize this into two worlds, right? One is basically underdeveloped and underprivileged, where they don't have any form of identity, and then they don't have any access to basically education and other services. And the second sector is where basically you have identity and you have access to technology, you have access to online education as well, but there are challenges with respect to privacy, safety, security, and so many things, right? And this is where exactly SSI is able to solve the problem in both the categories. Because, so I can give you example from the first category first, when we have made a proposal to UNICEF where we can issue a self-sovereign identity, which could be paper-based. You don't even need technology. You don't need a smartphone. You can basically just register somebody in using a laptop or using a basic desktop, and then you print that on a piece of paper, and they can carry it everywhere. As simple as that. And that basically gives them a secure identity using which they can get access to other services, including education. And when we talk about the developed and developing world, that is where a self-sovereign identity would basically ensure that while we are accessing online services and online education, that is where the children, the students, they are safe, they are secure, and then there are no challenges with respect to cybercrime, there are no challenges with respect to privacy, and then obviously they are also protected from harmful content. So this is where I think the underlying challenge is basically with respect to an identity, because without an identity, there are so many other challenges that basically come into play. And obviously, I think this has been a very interesting discussion, because what I felt was that we are talking about a lot of building blocks, right? There are, because different people focus on different areas, and this is where we are talking about building blocks which can be actually connected together, and then basically we end up creating a solution which can basically at least serve a big portion of the society.
You know, it's
I have a
interesting.
question for you. Sorry.
Oh, yes, Sarah, you were going to come in there.
I want. On the one hand, you are right. You're talking about, we have an ID, we have the credentials of these ideas, and we have the accessibility to these ideas, and we can connect a huge bunch of people to this idea of accessibility. But on the other hand, you lead into an ethical question. Who has the right to access what kind of knowledge? So think about Hong Kong, for example. It was a self-sovereignty state, and now they permit you to access to knowledge which is not conform with the politics. So when it comes to an Earth ID, and it comes to a general ID of storage, and we have, do we want to have second-class education, or do we want a high classification of educational sectors? And who is creating the ethic, and what can we know, and what can we study? And for example, I give you an example. If a robot is learning how to build web, do you want that? But on the other hand, if people are studying something which is, for example, in this COVID field, so many people can study biology, but if common sense is in the country that we will fit the knowledge to you, and you do not have to study that in your own, because we are afraid you're misleading information or something like that. Is this technology not creating more problems in ethic at the first row than it is maybe useful?
So that's a very important question. I would allow others to also answer, but I just want to very quickly add a note to this. So obviously there's always an ethical problem with respect to a digital identity, because in some sense there's some bit of I think what you call responsibility comes with power, right? So I think and I think this is where I think when we talk about a lot of misinformation, a lot of bad content, and obviously basically in uncontrolled access to information, obviously these challenges are there, right? But it also depends on basically the governance, right? Because obviously even when we talk about blockchain as a technology and many other technologies or industries, there's a role of governance there, because obviously there are because not everybody is responsible, right? And this is where I think the governance is needed, because there's that lack of responsibilities there, right? So that is a short answer, but I want to give others also an opportunity to address that question.
Hey, Maria's got her hand up. You're on mute still, Maria.
Thank you for letting me unmute here. Thanks. So I just wanted to raise two things. One of the statistics in Shiv's presentation that was pointed out, the number of NEETs, that 2/3 of those people are women and girls. That it is not always that that they are not interested, but that they have been very underserved, and that there is danger in pursuing some courses of study that exceed what their culture would allow. I think that's also for people who have limb differences. There are places where you have a limb difference, education is considered wasted on you. So in those cases, like some of our volunteers are bringing them into maker spaces to train them. The informal learning is incredibly important, and having means to recognize that informal learning and to include that as part of what the edtech sector would give them means to certify, means to exchange, and then most importantly, to have these credentials be endorsable, because it is not enough just to say that I've received this. It is even more powerful to say that this is knowledge that I am currently using to solve problems, or that these are people that I have helped in an effective way. And so again, open recognitions yoked with the blockchain, I think it is a very powerful solution, but also as a way for people who would not find it possible to certify in any way, that they'd pursued a course of study or had mentoring or had done some project-based learning in that field, that is something powerful as a means for us to do that. And one other thing, Shiv had mentioned a paper certificate being something that someone can carry. Another thing is that the innocuous QR code that can be scanned, and that being really the treasure chest that a person carries with them. Or in the case of the Humanitarian Passport Project, the UN Learning, the Save the Children's training, there are many other groups that have this as a platform and also as a way of doing digital recognitions, that it should be learning that's portable, that we want to empower people in this fashion. And when they're in the field and giving out paper certificates, the QR code is their way of gaining entree back into this world, that we're not leaving them in that very first slide in that agricultural age or in that early industrial, but that this, even though that might be the where they're working, where they're surrounded, that we have brought all people into this fifth age. And so even if it's a paper certificate, that QR code on it empowers them to access their digital identity and then decide who they're going to share it with, to give them that amount of agency, and to also for that be means for us to continue to help them and make their living sustainable and their community sustainable. So thank you for letting me share.
No, it's good. There's two other things that I thought, actually, again, going back to Shiv's presentation, that slide, portable, yes, so you can take it from your paper onto online. But I think there's another thing where the technology can help is resilience, and resilience against censorship. That's really interesting, that other people cannot take down your certifications, whatever, and persistence. So those are very powerful things, because paper is good. I know, there's nothing wrong with paper, but someone can steal it and take it. But if you have the right information online, and if you can't be censored, because governments change. You mentioned what's happening in Hong Kong. So governments change, priorities change, and maybe your information could be submerged otherwise. Does anyone want to talk about persistence or resistance to censorship? Is that something that people are interested in?
Yeah, so and I also wanted to circle back a little bit to that ethical question. I know that Shiv has already put forth his point, and I just wanted to give an example in terms of how you can perceive this. This was something that I was recently came across a video which talked a little bit about decentralized identity and how you kind of look at it, and this was an example that kind of stuck at me. Right, there are three ways you can think about how you can access your identity or work with your identity. One is local identity, right? So that works only in your geographic or wherever your demographics are, just in your immediate, you request the local provider to give you a local identity, and that works only over there, right? And you are happy, you are good to go, like, because you really don't care about globalization or global identity or whatever, right? That's one way to look at it. Another is you want a global identity, but you don't want to do all the work. So the example given was, say you go to a hotel and you're interested in skiing, but you don't want to take the effort of doing research of what are the different skiing organizations, etc. So you ask the hotel to book a skiing package for you, right? And you are happy with whatever they choose. And that's your centralized agencies giving you your identity. You are happy with whatever infrastructure they are providing. For example, your Gmail, or your whatever other centralized bodies that are working. And the third is, okay, I think the example that they used all throughout was like basically traveling using boats or something. So in the first one, you just go and book the local boat guide and use that. In the second one, you take a package, and in the third one, you buy your own boat, right? And you try to navigate through the seas yourself, right? Now this is your decentralized identity, where it comes along with the responsibility to learn how to use the boat, to learn how to navigate the seas. And you have a responsibility to yourself, right? To, of course, be alive, be able to navigate through the seas and learn about, everything. And this is where your, responsibility of using your decentralized identity comes into picture. Like, how do you ensure that you are using them in the right way? The kind of information that you're giving using your decentralized identities is projected the right way. This is one. And the second is, this can be controlled using governance, which Shiv has already mentioned. But sometimes, and in a lot of conversations that I've come across, governance is because of however we have been used to the governance that has been happening so far. Governance is sometimes always matched with having a centralized entity. Like, is there a centralized entity that is going to come and govern? And then there's this question of, then where is decentralization into picture? But that's not true, because now we are moving from a centralized governance to a decentralized governance mechanism. If you think about DAOs, where community voting happens on proposals, right? And you can always have this kind of governance where community agrees to vote upon what kind of information is ethical and what is not, right? And it can be maybe, I don't know whether it needs to be the governance needs to be state wise or country wise, or it could just be like one single governance. I'm sure there's a lot of effort that needs to go in that, but there are ways to do this decentralized governance. And this is where you take the opinion of the community as to what should be censored and what should not be censored. The community creates proposals to the governing organization, saying that, I think we should not censor this content. I think it is important to see. And then you get a vote on it, you get a vote from the community, right? And this is how this is what decentralization is all about. It is about giving power to the people. It is, and it could be anything. It could be it could be in a DID system, or it could be any other organization that you are building for whatever purposes, right? You give the power to the community to vote, to create proposals, and to figure out what is right and what is wrong. You are taking that power away from the centralized agents and giving it to the people. That's what this is all about. And when you think about censorship or resilience, this is all just a small piece that plays a huge part in this whole governance mechanism. So what is important is to set up these kind of governance mechanisms where people can actually create significant proposals on information that needs to go out as educational material, whereas information that is not educational and just harmful to everyone, right? So I think that is where we can make a difference, because that is where decentralization can come in, right? And one of the other things that people always question is that, can the community take the right decision, right? And this has been proven time and again, especially in a decentralized context. Oops, I see.
Yeah, no, and if I can just take up on that comment there before I hand back to Shiv for closing comments. The one of the guests has asked about continued access to credentials for refugees where they've lost or been stolen their different certificates. How do we issue it? And I think Maria touched on that earlier and said we can build a new profile for someone. We might not know they're an engineer, but they act like an engineer. They talk it in, they have the knowledge. There's ways of building stuff even without having that prior centralized information, then it goes right the way back down to if we have a decentralized system where we can get, doesn't matter where you are, what's blown up, we can gather your profile again. So I'm going to go to Shiv to close up this very exciting session. We go on for a lot longer. I don't, closing words, Shiv, what would you like to say?
Let me thank you very first because I think I did a mistake that I did not introduce at the beginning of this panel, and I think you don't need an introduction because I think everybody knows you at least in the blockchain space and outside, and you are a very accomplished individual. And I think if anybody is there in the room who doesn't know Jillian, she is basically the CEO of Block Leaders. She is a radio host, and she is like the 50 top most influential women in the blockchain technology, and she has. I think she has done some good in the politics as well, right? So I think she's a very, very well accomplished leader, and she's also.
I'm going to interrupt you and say, what I love doing is what I'm doing here, listening to, I'm interrupting you, listening to very intelligent people. So I'm always upskilling myself by surrounding myself with panels like this and with speakers like you. The privilege is all mine. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Jillian. Thank you for having you here, and thank you for moderating this panel. And I would like to thank all the panelists, Gyan, Vincent, Maria, and York for this interesting conversation. I hope the audience enjoyed the discussion. I would also like to thank all the audience members for participating, and I hope they were able to learn a few things from this discussion. And I just also wanted to announce basically our next event, which is basically going to be decentralized identity for travel sector. I think we had a few points about travel in today's discussion also. I think we would be able to build a stronger discussion on travel in our next event. So thank you very much, and please join our next event as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.